Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. The federal workforce is shrinking under President Trump. The world's richest man, meanwhile, Elon Musk, is at the helm of Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Nearly all federal departments and agencies seem to be under the corporate cost-cutting strategy that Trump and Musk are bringing to the U.S. government. Veterans Affairs, the Defense Department, Department of Education, and that's just to name a few. Now, there's one agency that gets less attention but has a direct impact on Americans' wallets, and that's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB. It protects Americans from fraud and scams and all kinds of unfair business practices.
Earlier this month, Robin, over 100 CFPB employees were laid off, with many more expected. On February 14th, a federal judge ordered the CFPB to pause its plans for mass layoffs for now. A hearing on the issue is scheduled for March 3rd. But what will happen if the nation's consumer watchdog agency is gutted by mass layoffs? Here to help us answer those questions is someone who knows the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau well. Angela Hanks is the former Associate Director of External Affairs at the CFBP. She was a Biden-Harris appointee and left the CFPB, as part of the normal administration transitions. Angela, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So before we get into the most recent attempts to shrink or completely gut the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau, let's start with CFPB 101. What is it and why is it created in the first place?
Yes. So the CFPB was born out of the 2008 financial crisis. Prior to COVID, the 2008 financial crisis was the most significant recession that any of us have experienced in our lifetimes. Millions of people lost their homes, their retirement savings, because of business practices that were inherently risky and put people's financial savings and livelihoods on the line. At to serve corporate profits. So as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, Congress created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the purpose, as you stated earlier, was to protect people from financial fraud and shady lending practices. And it covers really so many areas of people's financial lives. So some of the work that the CFPB does is ensuring that people don't get scammed on their mortgages or their bank accounts, their credit cards, their auto loans, truly the things that we all think about day to day when it comes to our personal finances. The CFPB is a new agency and a small agency, but it delivers a tremendous amount for consumers. Over the history of the agency, which again is quite short, just over a decade, it has returned over $21 billion directly to consumers. So that's people who reach out to the CFPB because they've been involved in a financial scam, or they've been harmed by their mortgage company or their credit card company, or gouged on fees. And the CFPB is able, both through its complaint system, but also through enforcement actions, to return money directly to people. And if this agency isn't allowed to exist anymore, not only will that sort of direct to consumer relief not happen anymore, but also the rules that structure everything from mortgage markets to financial markets to ensure that people don't get scammed will also go not enforced. And certainly, I think will worry about the impacts of that in the long term.
And Angela, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been a target of Republicans since its inception in 2008. Why is that?
Yes. So as I mentioned, the CFPB is a tiny agency, but the work that the CFPB does impacts some of the biggest financial firms in the country. And so certainly because of that, it's always had a target on its back. I would argue that ensuring that people are able to rest easy knowing that the fees that they're paying in their bank accounts or their credit cards aren't exorbitant, that the mortgage company that they're working with isn't scamming them, that the payday lenders aren't taking advantage of them, certainly far outweigh the interests of a small number of corporations who don't want to be held accountable for their actions. But that really has been why there's a target on its back. But again, the CFPB again and again delivers to regular people every day.
And why do we need a consumer watchdog agency in the first place when we have laws in our country that already protect people's constitutional rights?
Yes. So, an important part of the work that the CFPB does is enforce the laws that Congress created. So, there is a enforcement division. All of the attorneys in the enforcement division are currently now on administrative leave. As you mentioned earlier, many attorneys have been fired, and they're responsible for enforcing the law. So, as a result of the administrative leave, there are 39 enforcement actions that are on hold, and these really run the gamut. There's a pending enforcement action against Experian for not doing complete investigations into uh, errors on people's credit reports. Right before Director Chopra resigned, he announced a major enforcement action moving forward against Capital One, who had withheld $2 billion in interest savings from their customers. So these are not small enforcement actions, and it really is the agency that is responsible for carrying out enforcement of the laws that Congress creates. Not only does CFPB do enforcement, there's also a significant supervision division, again, that's also currently on administrative leave, that's responsible for having direct relationships with financial institutions to ensure that they're complying with the law consistently. The CFPB supervises institutions that have assets over $10 billion, as well as a range of institutions that we have sort of uh, um, deemed important for supervision in some instances because of the risky nature of the business that they're engaged in. That work is incredibly important to making sure that we don't have to use enforcement as the only tool. We have this opportunity to work with companies up front to make sure that they're following the law. And those are just a couple of the ways that the CFPB helps enforce the law, but it really is a complement to the laws that Congress passes.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the layoffs that have happened and the ones in limbo at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's the country's top consumer watchdog agency. Our guest is Angela Hanks. She's the former Associate Director of External Affairs at the CFPB. And we also have a phone call. Barbara has given us a call from Detroit. Barbara, thank you for calling the Metro. What's your experience with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau?
They are one of my favorite federal agency.
Oh.
A couple years ago, my daughter called me and said she went to pay her mortgage and the bank would not accept her payment. I spoke with her husband. I said, you all make that payment. He told me the bank refused to accept the payment. Within a couple weeks, my daughter called me at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, upset. They had received a foreclosure notice. I said, I'll take care of it. The next morning, I called the Federal Trade Commission. They connected me to the Consumer Protection Unit. I explained. They asked me to have my daughter call them directly. She did. Within a week, my daughter received a letter from the bank that they were out of foreclosure.
Wow, Angela. Thank you so much for telling us about your experience and your daughter's experience. Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara. Angela is who we have on the line who I want to turn to. But Barbara, again, that really seems to demonstrate some of the key roles that the CFPB has. And now back to you, Angela. Can you speak to Barbara's experience a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara, so much for sharing your stories. There are millions of stories like Barbara's. Over the lifetime of the CFPB, 4 million people have registered complaints with the CFPB. There's a 98% timely response rate. So, I think often people think of the government as something where there's not accessibility, or you might not be able to reach a person to help solve your individual issue. But the CFPB does that every day for people. In Michigan alone, over the course of the lifetime of the CFPB, 180,000 Michiganders have filed complaints with the CFPB. So tens of thousands of people like Barbara who've had issues, or her daughter having issues with their mortgage company, with their credit card company, with their auto loan, with their bank account, with their student loan. That the CFPB has been able to help with. Of those 180,000, we know that at least 8,000 of those are service members. Another 5,000 at least of those are older Americans. So the CFPB is also focused on helping people who are often disproportionately targeted for scams get the relief that they need when they need it.
Now, the remaining CFPB employees, we have to talk about that and the fate of the watchdog agency itself. It all feels like it is in a lot of limbo now, and that's, of course, concerning when we think about Barbara's experience. In your estimation, what would happen if deeper cuts are made to the agency? What's most at risk for Americans?
I think the biggest risk is defanging a watchdog that helps ordinary people stand up to corporations that take advantage of them. So a couple of the examples that I've already given, whether it's Capital One taking interest from their customers, Wells Fargo, we had a big enforcement action against them where they were setting up fake accounts in their customers' names. I mean, the list goes on and on. Those types of things will go unchallenged if the CFPB doesn't exist, or if it's significantly diminished. That has an impact on anyone who has a mortgage, a bank account, a credit card, uses a payment app, has an auto loan, has a student loan. I mean, that is tens, if not hundreds of millions of people who won't have the recourse to stand up when these types of things happen to them. And then, I think that in addition to the kind of enforcement and supervision work that I talked about, the CFPB is also in the business of issuing guidance, clarifying the law, conducting rulemaking. So, for example, last year, the CFPB finalized a rule to cap credit card late fees at $8. It just finalized in the Biden-Harris administration rule that would cap overdraft fees. These are the types of things that I wouldn't expect a Trump administration CFPB to pursue. And again, that hurts the consumers who rely on these financial institutions every day.
Angela Hanks is the former Associate Director of External Affairs at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She was a Biden-Harris appointee and left the CFPB as part of normal administration transitions. Angela, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks so much for having me.
There's a hearing set for March 3rd. It will likely determine the fate of many CFPB jobs that are planned to be eliminated as part of President Trump's efforts to shrink the federal government.
And a side note, if you want to hear more about President Trump and Elon Musk's plans to shrink the government and run it like a business, find our previous episode of The Metro from January 28th. It's called, Should the Government Be Run Like a Business?
Coming up at 11, we're talking about the history of Black leadership in Detroit, and we're asking whether the next mayor should be Black, and we want to hear from you. How vital is this race for Detroit's next mayor? 313-577-1019.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is The Metro. Stay right with us.